Hello, Shoshana, and welcome to the Jewish Women Entrepreneurs Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I know we've been talking like just before the podcast. We have so much to talk about. I hope one episode is going to make it, or one interview is going to make it, because there's so many things. We're going to try to talk fast. Exactly. There's so many things that we want to talk about, and we have half an hour. And if we need to, we'll just re-invite you and speak about more topics that everyone is really happy to talk about. But before we start, I want everyone to know who you are, and I'm going to share your bio with everyone, and then we'll start with the questions that I have prepared for you. So Shoshanna Keats Jaskoll, I hope I'm saying the name right.
Keats Jaskoll, yeah.
Keats Jaskoll, okay, we're good, is a writer, an activist, and a business owner. She is the co-founder and director of a nonprofit organization that advances the rights of religious women, chochmatnashim.org. She's also the co-founder of Reach 3K, which is a boutique messaging firm for Israel's businesses and nonprofits. She loves her people enough to call out the nonsense and spend too much time fighting anti-Semitism online. She's from Lakewood, and today she lives in Israel with her family. Everyone, welcome Shoshana on our Jewish Women Entrepreneurs Podcast.
Hello.
So just for everyone who is listening, I'm going to put everything back into the context, how I reached out to you and I said, I have to have you as a guest on this podcast. It was actually Justine, our dear friend, our common friend, Justine Zwirling, who sent and shared your last, I think I haven't checked, your last article on Times of Israel in the past war that we had, which was about the Intifada, right? I'm going to let you talk about that. And I read this article and I was like, wow, this woman is amazing. You've basically put words into things that I didn't even know how to express, that I felt resonated so much. And then I shared it everywhere. And then I said, that's it. I have to invite you into our podcast. So I would like to start with that topic. I would like to start about Israel advocacy, about fighting or defending, or how are we put on the spot to defend Israel when things happen in our country. Unfortunately, it happens more than we want. And you have a sentence that has been really really interesting, right? I think it was the subtitle, the tagline of your article. There are 14 million Jews total. Bella Hadid, I hope I'm saying her name right, has 43 million Instagram followers. We have no chance in the fight for public opinion, but it almost doesn't matter. So I would love for you to comment on that, because when I read that, I was like, oh my God, we're screwed. That's it. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So sometimes it feels, I don't know how many of our listeners are on, I think specifically Twitter and Instagram, far more than Facebook or LinkedIn, but it is everywhere. Sometimes it feels like there's just an absolute onslaught of anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Zionistic sentiment, anti-Jewish sentiment, even though they claim it's not anti-Semitism, it's simply anti-Zionism. But if Zionism is the national aspirations for Jewish people in the Jewish homeland, so yeah, it's kind of hard to be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. So I think people forget, because we're so perhaps loud, prominent, or if you want to be positive, you could say we're so prominent, but we are literally 0.02% of the world's population. Like, if you think about that in another perspective, and I didn't, bring in a ready analogy with me, but the idea that there's 7 billion people in the world, and there's about 14 million Jews. Like, we're very, very, very small percent of the population. Now in New York, we're about in America, we're 2% of the population, and in New York, we're probably higher. So depending on where you live, you may know more Jews, and other places you'll never see a Jew ever. You'll only know of us from what you hear on the news. Okay, now Israel is way disproportionately represented in the news. It's insane. I don't know if I have to tell people in the UN how many. There's only one country that's permanently on the United Nations Security Council list up for resolutions, and it's Israel. Okay, And there are dozens more resolutions against Israel than there are against a lot of the other countries combined, if not all the other countries combined. So what I'm saying is there's 43 million people who follow Bella Hadid. Now, if Bella Hadid, whose father is Palestinian and mother is Dutch, tells a very one-sided narrative, and she only says what she wants people to hear, and she knows she controls her audience. That's why it's called to be an influencer. Okay, so she is influencing their opinion. She's influencing their thoughts and their entire perspective. So if she's got 3 million followers, even if they retweet once or reshare once, think about what that means and think about how of a disadvantage we are at telling our story. And at the end of the day, all we're doing is defending ourselves and trying to say, well, that's not true, or that's not true, or hey, maybe you should talk about the fact that Hamas is shooting rockets, or, people talk about this wall. Well, why is there a wall? As soon as you ask people who are tweeting about, quote unquote, the apartheid wall, what is that wall? Where is that wall? And when was it built? And why was it built? No answers, because they don't know. So you're talking about people who only get their information on a very surface level from one person or two people, and they just regurgitate. And so when I say it almost doesn't matter, it's because you can drown in this. Yeah. We could all drown in it, and it's devastating. At the end of the day, I turn off my phone and I walk around, or I drive around and I breathe the air and I say, okay, but we're here. And as many as followers as she may have, and they may hate us around the world, but we have the IDF, and we have all of us, and we have God, and all her followers are not going to bring us down. So that's what that line really means, is that it can feel overwhelming. And maybe we won't win that. Maybe we'll never convince those 43 million people. But we're here. And we're not leaving.
Right. And so that's the optimistic note that you're leaving us with, not the, we have lost the war even before it started, like the media war, right? The information war. But, we've been talking about this in this podcast, actually, with our previous guests, which is, and it also comes up a lot with people that I work with, and even for myself, frankly, that we are, seeing things on social media. We are, people are, commenting and also confusing being Jewish, being Israeli, people all over the world, Jewish people all over the world. I just came back from France, and I've met my family, and they said it was very difficult for them. And when, they had the war and they were Jewish people walking around the street, and people, would insult them, just like you said, because, they're Jewish, so they're connected with Israel. It's terrible. It's really terrible. And I really definitely had a hard time also defending and explaining that. So my question to you is, so what should we do on an individual level? If this is such a big task, and if this is such a huge, the competition is so huge, and we also hear a lot of people not complaining, but maybe saying that Israel doesn't really have a proactive branding or narrative, right? And that it doesn't really come out, like you said, we keep on defending ourselves. So should we just say, forget it, we have our life and we have our Israel and we have the army and we're good? Or should we, each and every one on our own level, defend or comment or, refuse or remove people from our groups, or, the things that are done when you're an activist, a proactive activist? What do you say to that?
So I think it depends on who you are and where you are, right? So if being an activist is going to cause you pain or damage or a job, then I don't think that you should take that on, because I don't think anything an individual is going to do on that level will make the difference for the Jewish state or the Jewish community to the point where they should risk themselves. Okay. At the same time, if you are in a workspace or in a community bulletin, whatever, and someone is abusing that space to be anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist, then yes, you have to, unfortunately, get involved. And I would just say, in any activism, be smart about it. Figure out the way that it's going to be as effective as possible with as least amount of risk, which means you could probably find an ally before you respond. You can probably find the right people to go to, or the way to respond, if it's a WhatsApp group, if it's a workplace. And if you need it, or if you can, and if you have because remember, it's not just the person you're responding to, right? You have however many people are listening. And that's a lot of the times why we even do this advocacy to begin with, because I'm not going to convince the person who thinks that I eat Palestinian babies for dinner, right? I'm not going to ever. Doesn't matter.
No.
Nor do they want to be convinced, by the way. They're very happy to hate me. But for those who are listening, and for those who need ammunition, or for lack of a better word, who need tools and skills and words, you're saying it for them. So a lot of times I will ask the person who's saying whatever crazy thing they're saying, well, do you know how we got to the West Bank in the first place, for example? Or do you know that Gaza has been Jew-free since 2005, and that the blockade only started in 2007 when Hamas took over after killing 14 Palestinians in Fatah, right? A violent takeover. And what happens is, when you start to speak in that way, when you ask a question about history, about context, about do you know this, and they don't have an answer. So first of all, they usually show their colors. They kind of go, well, but you. And then people who are listening are like, oh, okay. So maybe this person doesn't actually know what they're talking about, which is always a good thing for other people to see. And the other people can, and this will happen, they'll reply to you offline, or they'll ask you something privately, and they'll say, can you explain this more to me? I have gotten messages from Americans who say, thank you so much for saying what you do. It gives me the strength to fight back. It gives me the strength to walk out the door. At the height of all of this, it was a young woman from New York who texted me and said, I'm afraid to go outside dressed as a Jew. And I grew up in New York and New Jersey. Like, that is never, ever the way it's been there. I always been safe for Jews, and it was just heartbreaking to me, and it's not okay. And so if we can give strength by speaking out to other people who don't have that strength, who need an ally, that's why you speak out. Not because you think you're going to convince the idiot that hates you anyway, but because you want to give strength to the people who are hurting, and because you want to give tools and skills and words to those people who also want to speak out. And so I would recommend strongly, any of you who feel like you don't know what to say or do, there's so many of us, thank God, on Twitter who are trying, or on Instagram who are trying, who are speaking out. I'm happy to put you, in touch, or to give you a list to follow, but it's not hard to find, and there's great accounts to go to. And also history is your friend. We don't have to be afraid of history, right? Like, if you start asking questions, specific questions, they're just not going to have answers, because they're just, well, you kill them and you take their homes and blah, blah, blah. And basically, if you can keep your calm and you can ask pointed questions, you can diffuse most times. And for those people you can't diffuse because they're just crazy, walk away.
Yeah, definitely. And I so agree with you, everything you're saying, because I think ignorance is really our biggest enemy. I think people don't know, and very surprisingly, Jewish people don't know. Meaning, like you would say, non-Jews, it's not their story, it's not their history, okay. But I think that there is a lack of knowledge and lack of information, like what you said about the United Nations. It's amazing when you hear the numbers. I think it's 190 resolutions that are against Israel, and it's like the biggest number ever in the United Nations. Like, when you hear those information, like, oh, okay, so now I have something that I can use. I have an argument. I have something that I can actually use. And I also want to bring you, because that's the second topic that I want to talk about, which is women, right? You're very strong and powerful advocate for women as well, women's rights. And I feel like the way you answered that question right now is also a very feminine way of defending, right? Because you said, don't make it personal. You said, don't do it if you feel like you're going to lose the debate or, the discussion. And sometimes there is also an aggressive way of answering those things, or attacking, or making it more personal or more ego-driven, which is maybe a more masculine way. Not talking about men and women here, right? Because we can be men with feminine and women with masculine. But do you find that women have a different way to respond to those attacks, or it's not your experience, or do you find like it's the same across the board?
It's a good question. There are a lot more men who are, I think, aggressively, and I don't mean aggressively like violently, I mean proactively defending Israel. I think men have a little bit less to lose, because women, when they come after women, and Emily is a friend of mine who she's a very big Israel advocate, and she is lambasted. And this happened to Eve Barrow as well when she came out, as pro-Israel Zionist, and they were just attacked terribly. I don't know if I just have a very high filter on Twitter and therefore I don't see the stuff that people send to me, or if they don't send it to me as much. I'm not sure. I don't get as much as they do. Thank God, because it may affect me if I did. But I find actually, for me, I've always thought it was amazing how many gay men are advocates for Israel. And I think it's because they're so used to standing up for who they are and being proud of who they are in the face of hate, that it's just a natural shift to take from being a gay man to being an Israeli. And I find them to be the most, I love them. I think they're fantastic, and they're really amazing on Twitter and on Instagram as well. There's Chen Mazik, there's Blake Flayton, there's Shai DeLuca, excuse me, and they are fabulous. So it's a good question. I never really thought of it that way. Whether it's a feminine or a masculine way. I just think I've learned this from being an advocate for women's rights, that there's times that you should waste your time, or take your time, I should say. And there's times that you have to walk away and save it for a battle you can win, where the stakes matter. Like if I argued with every idiot, and sometimes I do get dragged into it on Twitter, I would never get anything done. And I want you to know something. That's part of their strategy.
Yes.
If they can waste your time, then you're not doing what you want to do, right? You're playing their game.
Yes.
So just remember that when you want to answer everyone, you are falling into what they want you to do, which is to be defensive all the time. And sometimes you just got to put up an Israeli flag and say, have a great day, bye, and walk away. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you lose. It means you win. Go walk outside and breathe the air. Go get an aroma cafe.
It means that you're realigning
and
recentering around yourself as well, and not letting yourself being dragged on all this. But I love the fact that you brought in the gays, because I've already made this comparison between women fight, Israel fight, and gay fight. Meaning, it's not a coincidence that we have had Israel only 72 plus years. And that women's rights are also in the biggest now, of all centuries. This is now where women are waking up, women are taking back their place. I don't want to say power, because it's not a power struggle, but more like recognizing their place. And also gays are also getting also the rights to fight for their right to exist, to be who they are. And it's not a coincidence. It's like all those fights are really connected. And I think that it's really interesting that you notice that gay people are even better in advocacy. No, they're out there, and I think that it's for me, the feminine way of doing the advocacy, and I'm sure that gays have both, a balance, but the feminine way is a much more powerful in terms of convincing, and in terms of being efficient, and in terms of not being aggressive or insulting or talking back, or just putting yourself out there. I think that we have a lot to learn from that. And I also want to talk about what you do for women, because that's really also very inspiring. So you are the co-founder of a movement that's called Chokhmat Nashim. And doing the research a little bit before the interview, I just, I was like, okay, this is really interesting, because you're saying that this is a movement that is bottom up, not top down, right? So can you tell us more about the difference? Because yes, we hear a lot of organizations, the non-profit, that are defending women's rights. And I love when I heard shifting the conversation, changing social attitudes, and doing it bottom up. So can you explain to us how Chokhmat Nashim is different than the other organizations?
There's a lot of wonderful organizations in Israel and all around the Jewish world who that do education, or that fight, especially in Israel, they fight in the courts, for example, for women's rights, and they make sure that women are given the wherever there's a civil option. So they get them in the door. They allow them. They say you can't keep women out from this job, because here you have the civil track and the religious track, and sometimes the civil track can force the religious track. It can't change halakha. It can't force them to let women be rabbis, for example, but they can force them to let women take tests for certain things, because if a job is a requirement, if a certification is a requirement for a job, so you're automatically leaving out women. But anyway, so there's a lot of wonderful organizations that work in these various ways for agunot and for women in general. But we're the only ones who work to change. See, what happens is if you make change top down, but the community is not ready for it, they're just going to reject it. Right? So you won't have women applying for these positions, or you won't have women applying for these certifications, because it doesn't matter if the door's open, they ain't going to walk through it. Mm-hmm. So you need the shetach, you need the field to be prepared, and for women to, and for men also, to see that a woman accomplishing is only positive for the Jewish community. A woman being in a leadership position only brings positive change and wonderful things to the whole entire Jewish community. Mm-hmm. And until they see that, all the legal and all the laws, it's not going to make enough of a difference. Okay, so we talk for years. We've spoken with articles and podcasts and events to talk about how women's advancement is actually really, really a positive thing. When you put women on boards, when you put women on committees and on school boards, so what you have is more representation. And anytime you have more representation, so you have more people represented. So I'll give you a very simple example. You take a rabbi of an Orthodox shul, okay? He's a great guy, but he's never experienced a tefillah, a prayer service, from behind the partition, okay? Mm-hmm. Never. So he doesn't know you can't see. He doesn't know you can't hear. He doesn't understand it's such a simple thing. I don't think there should be a rabbi out there that hasn't spent a prayer service. I understand, figure it out, that he should spend a prayer service in the women's section and experience it, because women are half of his congregation. And he should understand what that means. And whatever he can do within whatever shul it is, whatever your rules are, to make them more of a participatory, he should be doing that. Now, magnify that. If there's a rabbi or a communal leader or a school leader or whatever politician, in Israel, you have two Haredi parties. You have two parties that have no women. Mm-hmm. Okay, so usually they have about 8 to 10 seats, depending on the election, meaning each. So you have 16 to 20 automatically only men, and their women aren't represented. They don't go to the committees on women's health. They don't go to the committees on violence against women. So who the hell is taking care of them? And you can't say we represent you when you don't do the work. Okay, so what we talk about is not, and this is where it goes back to being a smart advocate. We don't say, you're so chauvinist and misogynist and you have to let us on because we deserve. No. Mm-hmm. We show that everything is better when women are heard. Everything. Mm-hmm. And we just show it. And we talk about it. We use examples. And we use examples of when women aren't heard. And we talk about it. The change in the community in the past 20 years alone is enough evidence to see that when women are in positions of influence and power and community leadership in Judaism, it only gets better. There's really nothing to be afraid of. So when we talk about what does Chochmat Nashim do, we talk about getting the community able to absorb and to be ready for women speakers, for women leaders. We don't even talk about titles. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Talking about making women a normal position in Orthodoxy so that the whole community can thrive. That's it.
Wow. Love it. Love it. And do you feel that today it is, because for a long time it was the positions or the people in power that would not allow the women to get to those positions. But today you said something different. You said it's bottom up, because even if people are already on top, at the bottom, women are not ready to really be empowered or to really take upon themselves or to lean in, right? So do you think it's more a problem today of the institutions or the people in power that are not leaving room, or more the women that are not acting or taking a role, a proactive role in this?
So I definitely wouldn't say it's the fault of the women. That's for sure not. I do think that it is the leadership that says no, 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 no. And that creates a community that says no, 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 no. So I'm not going to convince Rabbi X or Rabbi Y. If he doesn't see it on his own, there's nothing I'm going to do. But what I can do is talk to those people who are like that's why we change the conversation, right? Because if the conversation is only one way, no, 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 so then what are you ever going to learn? So we just put women's voices, women's perspectives into the conversation, and we highlight things that people don't know. I can't blame men or a man who doesn't know that there are problems in the mikvah until and unless we tell him and he doesn't listen.
Right.
That is the problem. So when I'm telling you there's a problem and you don't listen to the fact that there's a problem and you don't allow women to be represented, so then you're wrong. And then I can point that out in a way that isn't personal. But look, here we have a problem. It's clearly harming people. How are we going to resolve it? Who's the pressure point? Where do we go to say this has to change, right? So there's a lot of elements that it's not just highlighting the problem, and it's talking about a potential solution, and it's saying, okay, and where can we get the solution done? Right. So I definitely think it's obviously leadership, but leadership isn't going to change. Leadership, what does it mean to be a leader? You have a community. If your community is saying, I want something different, either you respond or you lose your position. So that's what we try to bring the community to understand, that they can and should be asking for change.
Right, definitely. You also say around Chokhmat Nashim that extremism is gaining ground in the Jewish world. There's a lot of extremism right now, and that we see that it's a lot of people are pulling to extremes. Is that something that, and obviously this is something that we know, that women are affected by that. When this happens, it's women that are usually the first to be affected by that. Do you have an explanation of why this is happening now? Why are we more in the extremes? Why are people being more orthodox or more whatever it is, pulling the cover? Do you have any explanation on why it's like that? And also, why is it that women are suffering more from that?
So whenever you have an ill in society, so the women are going to feel it first, because we're the least powerful. If we have no power and we have no influence, and the men are in power, so they don't see it, right? I don't think men are evil.
No.
Often they just don't experience life the way we experience life. They don't experience Judaism the way we experience Judaism. And so if they don't know there's a problem, they can't fix it. But then again goes back to but then you have to listen when we tell you there's a problem. And that's when they're culpable. So here, for example, in Bet Shemesh, I've watched for the past 14 years, I've watched the extremism take over. So they used to not have they had pictures of women. And then they had pictures of, younger girls. And then they had pictures of little girls. And now they have pictures of no girls, nothing feminine. You can't even have a wig in these pictures. And so when women are being erased, so the opposite of what you want is happening, right? When I've said this for a long time, when women aren't seen, their voices are not heard, and their needs are not met. And that's the truth. If you put women in the back of the bus, if you take women off of posters, if you don't let them advertise their businesses, if you make them just an object, which is what you do when you erase them. Okay, this is the flip side of pornography, by the way. You're just turning a woman into her body by saying she can't be seen. So you are you're removing her humanity, and you're completely reducing her influence on society. And those people who say it's not true either are lying or don't understand because they haven't seen it. But I've been watching it happen for 14 years. I've been seeing it happen, and I watch it happen. And women have been spit on. I've been spit on. I'm completely fully dressed. It has nothing to do with modesty. It has to do with, you don't belong here. You can't be here. This is our turf. So I forgot already your question, but
what you're saying is anyway. Right. No, but my question was, why do you think it's more extreme? If you know why it's more extreme, and why are women the first ones to suffer from this?
So again, I think
you answered the second part.
Yeah, and in terms of why is it becoming more extreme? Look, the Haredi community, God bless it, has created a situation. It's painted itself into a corner. Because if the men are, and by the way, it's not only the Haredi population that's at fault, because it's also the government. Ultra Orthodox, yes, sorry. Because if you're, and I was actually speaking to an Israeli a couple of weeks ago, and they didn't even know this, which really surprised me. If you want a dispensation from the army, right? If you don't want to go to the army, you can't work. Right? If you're saying, I'm a yeshiva student, I'm going to learn, and Torah is my service, right? Learning Torah is my service, and that's my job. So you cannot work and earn anything. You have to be enrolled in a yeshiva, in an ultra-Orthodox school of learning Torah only. So if what we're doing is, when they can't enroll, and their lifestyle doesn't really work with the IDF, and thank God the IDF doesn't really need them. That's the truth of the matter. We don't need, whether it's right or wrong that they don't serve, that's something else. I personally think they should do at least national service, but okay. But the deal was set up that they could go and they would learn, and then at 27, they can go to work. So you have these young men who are from 18 to 27 not allowed to earn money. So what did they do? They turned the women into the breadwinners. So the women are more educated secularly than their men, than their husbands, and they're out in the world. They're in high tech, they're in advertising, they're working and bringing in money. What are we going to do? The women are worldly and the men are not. So how do we how do we try to compensate for what we have imbalanced?
Mm-hmm.
We put them in their place by telling them they are not modest enough and they are not quiet enough and they have to be sitting here and they can't be seen. No. So what do you get?
We are afraid of them. That's what happens. Then there's fear.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Of course there's fear. Of course there's fear. Women are out in the world. So unfortunately they're now painted into this corner where they are overcompensating for something that, oh, it's such a mess.
We're not going to solve everything today, but at least we're putting words and we're also explaining, because I think a lot of people see only from the outside and they don't really understand, this whole system. Like, for example, like I said, I just came back from France and I have a friend who is a journalist, and she told me, she's Jewish, she loves Israel, she's been writing for Israel, but she told me that she heard about those frumka, right? Those women that are going around in a burka for ultra-Orthodox. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the black burka with a little, I don't know how even you call it, like a grill something, just to see the eyes, right? And like everything is dressed and they go around in the street all black, and little girls are also dressed like that. And she was asking me, have I seen it? And, people think we live in Israel, so we see everything, right? They don't understand that we're, we don't see that, but I know it exists. So I wanted to ask you about, about that. Is that part of this extremism? Has it been always like that? Do we have to help those women? Are those, yes.
They call them the Jewish Taliban women, burka babes, burka ladies, whatever. It's actually ironic because these women decided on their own to do it against their husbands, well, most of their husbands, and against the rabbis. Now, it's not a lot of people. It's maybe 100 families, whatever it is. The problem becomes that they do it to their daughters. And I've been driving down the street, and I have seen what I assume is a mother, because she's complete like a sheet. I don't have anything. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not lying. Anyway, like a complete sheet.
I don't know if we're having connection problems. Shoshana, can you hear me? I hope, guys, that you're still with us, because we're having a little connection problem. Let me connect here and see. Hello, everyone. Can you hear us? Oh, that's such a shame, because we were having such an interesting conversation with Shoshana. Please type in the chat if you can hear us. Yes, Amy is saying yes. Maybe it's a problem on Shoshana's end. It was so interesting to talk about the extremism and the women and the frumka and the burka. This has been questions that I've been wanting to ask and talk about for a very long time. So many people don't really understand what is going on here. Shoshana is coming back. Are you back? Yes, she is.
What happened?
I don't know. Are you here now?
Somebody didn't want us to have a conversation.
Someone, yeah, exactly. Someone didn't want us to have that conversation. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, good. So let's do it, because I was online and you just disappeared. So you were talking.
I was just watching. You weren't gone. Okay. Yes. What did you hear up to?
So we were talking about how you saw those women with their daughters and that they were like sheep, I think, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, they just wear, it's like not even like a burka. Burka, you can see the face or the eyes, whatever. They just literally, I don't even know how they see it. It's just like a cloth that hangs in front of their faces. And it is I have a visceral reaction every time I see it. It's impossible not to. It's tragic. So when you put that on a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, it's horrible. But to be honest with you, like, those women, the reason they do it is because, again, if you say, see, the whole idea of Judaism is supposed to be the golden road, the golden mean, right? Not to the left, not to the right. It actually says in the Torah you should not go right or left of what God tells you. So when you tell someone that tznius is modesty, right? Like it's translated as modesty, right? And I cover my head and I wear, my sleeves and I sleep Orthodox too. And some people do more than me. But there are actual Jewish laws that dictate what you cover and what you don't cover. So when you go beyond that, and when you erase women, which is not Jewish law at all, what's the end? There's no end. It's funny because people talk about the slippery slope on the left, right? God forbid, women rabbis, woo! But like, that's the worst case scenario on the left is like a woman heading a temple or synagogue, whatever you call it, right? And on the right, we're out of our minds. We've lost the plot. Like, we're nuts. We've erased women. We think that 3-year-olds are sexual, and we don't let them be on a newspaper. It's like, because they've caught themselves up in such a monumental twisting of the way things should be that they cannot get out of it because there's no end. So these women have taken it to their own extreme. Oh, well, if covering my elbows is modest and my wrists are even more, then obviously not showing anything at all has to be the most modest, because they've lost the sense that, no, you're put in this earth to be both spiritual and physical, and you have to live in this world and function, right? So they've lost that live in the world and function part. And you'll see they don't function. It just becomes a mess. They might rebut what I'm saying, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously I understand where you're coming from. I think it's this theory that the more we do, the better it is. Like, if I do it more, then it's going to be better, which is not what the Torah teaches, which is not, the lesson, or this is not how we want. It's more the alignment between the materialistic and the spiritual. It's not only being on the spiritual level. Here you are. Can you see us?
I don't understand what's happening.
I don't know either. It could be a connection problem. Sometimes we have that.
Okay.
And we're going to end with the last question anyway. Okay. Can you hear us now? Can you see us?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking to other people?
Okay. So the last question that I want to ask you, Shoshana, is about your messaging and branding company, Reach 3K, where you help companies and Israel and nonprofit to work on their messaging, to work on their branding. And I wanted to ask you about something that I see more and more, and I have my clients asking me about that, and I see more and more people niching more and more. Meaning, for example, when I came out with the Jewish Women Entrepreneurs podcast, people asked me, isn't it too, narrow of a niche? Do you really want to speak only to Jewish women entrepreneurs? And I feel like this is, for me, such an alignment, and so, so it's so I want to do. And so the answer is yes. But some people come to me and say, should I really say that I speak only to Jewish people, or should I be really broader? And then, if Jewish people come, it's fine. If not, not. So as a branding and messaging expert, what is your positioning on that? Should we go more specific, or is it a good thing to say we're talking only to women, we're talking only to Jewish women, or should we keep it open? Is that what is your take on that?
I think that, thank God, there are so many people doing so many things that you have no choice but to stand out. Okay. Thank God there's probably, I don't even know how many women entrepreneur podcasts, right? So how do you stand out from the rest? How do you make yourself, like you said, a niche, an expert in something? And I always say to the way I work is that we talk about the so what factor. Okay. What does that mean? So you say, a client comes to me and says, we have a soup kitchen, okay? Or we have a tech company. We are developing a very special component of something, or a biotech, or whatever it is. And I say, so what? Mm-hmm. And they say, well, it's very important because it's going to solve this problem. And I say, so what? And they say, well, there's nobody else in the field that's doing it exactly like we're doing it because we have a special patent that allows us to touch something. Okay, so what? And we just get down, and when they finally get over the insult, and then they say, oh, and that's it. Okay, when you can answer that question, so what, then you have what makes you special and what makes you unique, and then we can start talking about your brand. So that's exactly what we do. We just ask that question. We talk about who else is in your field and how are you different from those people. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's location. Sometimes you bring a personal touch that nobody else does. Sometimes your background is different, and you have to, or you don't have to, but it will help you in your business to lean into, to use a good word nowadays, a good phrase, lean into what makes you special and unique and work with that. Allow that to be your brand as long as it works for you. Sometimes it doesn't work for you and you have to shift. That's okay. That's okay. But at least you should ask yourself the really hard questions. Really answer that question. So what? So what, you have a soup kitchen?
I love that.
There's a million soup kitchens. So what, you serve hungry people? So what? You got to ask it, and then you'll get down to your core essence, and then you can start growing from there.
I love that. That's exactly why I started the Born to Do business community, because it's really like, what are you born to do? What are you unique, brilliant for? Like, what is it your special gift that you bring to the world? So I really love everything you said about so what. Wow, Shoshana, I wish we had more time to talk about more topics, because it's fascinating to hear you talk, and you have that way of saying simple things, but in a very, very authentic and very just way. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I love it. I love it. I mean, listen, it's also a way of sharing and answering questions that people are asking, really. And so that's also why we're doing it live. And if you want to go after in the comments and answer people's questions. And also, I know that you're a lot on Twitter, a lot on Instagram, a lot on Facebook. So if people want to reach out to you, if they want for whatever it is, whether it's Israel advocacy or women advocacy, or whether it's for messaging, branding for your company, I'm sure that you'll be happy to be in touch with them. So thank you, Shoshana. And thank you everyone for being with us for this third episode. This is only the third episode of the Jewish Women Entrepreneurs. We're here every Sunday at 6 for a live episode. So next week we'll have another guest. And thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Best of luck with this wonderful podcast.
Thank you, Shoshana. Very happy that you were with us. Bye, everyone.
Pleasure.